Welcome to the DrumChats podcast, where we're talking anything and everything to do with drums. Today's topic, snare drums. Here are your hosts, Travis Davis and Dave Douglas.
Hey everybody, this is Dave. You're listening to the DrumChats podcast, and I'm here with my buddy Travis Davis, who's down in Nashville. How are you doing, Travis?
Doing good, man. How are you?
I'm great. We're on part 3 of our snare drums series, and I think this is the final one. So we're just kind of wrap some things up here, and I guess we have vents left, which is kind of a fun one. Kind of like a weird ancillary piece of snare drums that's not really hasn't really been a factor that long. I feel like vents were just like something that were on snare drums. That was just like the little hole that you could like stick a pencil in, Yep. It was just like, what's this thing for? But whatever, like 15 years ago or so, they started getting super popular and they started getting really large and weird. So we'll definitely get into that a little bit. We're going to talk about lugs, which is another like, okay, is there anything to talk about here? But that'll be fun. And then we're going to dive into some classic snare drums and some like cool examples of some of the drums that we've talked about here over the last few weeks. So that'll be fun. What's going on with you?
Not a lot, man. Funny. It's cool that we're talking about snare drums and the vents and lugs. You said, is there much to talk about lugs? And I question the same thing. I started working at Drum Paradise here in Nashville. And so a lot of the session drummers have like several rolling cases full of snare drums, and so many of their snare drums have different lugs. And I have wondered what the lug styles contribute to, if they contribute to a type of sound. I know that a lot of lugs have certain tuning functionality aspects, stuff like that. And I've seen some
lugs do?
Yeah.
Really?
I think it was Yamaha. We'll say Yamaha.
Okay.
One of the I had to change some heads out on a drum, and the lugs, the tension rods don't come out of the lugs.
What?
Well, like they do to an extent, but whenever you loosen the tension rod, if you can imagine the lug on the side of the shell, as you're loosening the tension rod, that lug it's like a hollowed out ball, and it sits up against like a stem. And so whenever you loosen that tension rod, that ball comes off. So it makes changing the heads out a lot easier, as what they tried to make it happen.
I can't even envision what you're talking about right now.
Basically, the lugs that you see on the side of the shell, as you loosen the tension rods, those lugs come off. They're almost like...
Oh, is it like floating heads?
Kind of.
Where like the lugs... Are the lugs in contact with the shell of the drum?
They're like... Can you imagine like a snap button? Like,
I can imagine that.
It's kind of like that, where there's two parts to that lug. Like there's a part on the shell, and then the part where the tension rod goes into. It's weird to describe, but
that doesn't even, and that does it make it easier?
No, it was annoying, man.
It doesn't make it easier at all.
It was really difficult to, because like as you loosen them, they come undone. It's like, okay, great, but when you're putting them back on, it was a pain in the neck. And
companies, I appreciate that companies always try to innovate, and come up with new designs, and like, they're trying to solve problems, and like, changing heads can be, annoying and time consuming and whatever, but like you get in the groove of learning how to deal with the equipment that you have.
Yeah.
And, I've never thought, man, I wish there was an easier way to change my drum head, I mean, in my mind, the easier way to change the drum head is to get the drill bit that you can put on the cordless
I love that
screwdriver or whatever,
yeah.
and then you can just pull them off super fast, So that seems like it's a good, way to speed up the process, but I don't know about that. Sounds like an insane lug design.
Yeah.
And maybe someone's really got it down and they think it's easier, but it just sounds really foreign to what most drummers are going to be used to.
I feel like it was either Yamaha or Sonar, and it was an older kit, and so hopefully they did away with that, because it just wasn't that great.
Yeah, you see some really weird stuff on older drum kits when things were a little bit less standardized.
Yeah.
You know, and like there's I'm sure you've seen them. There's there's the tension rods that have you just like use a screwdriver on them. You've seen those before? I'm sure you have.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just like a flathead screwdriver you use on to tune your drums. So that's like really weird. But yeah, there's all kinds of weird little quirks about old drums that you find when people are trying new things out, and you know the world wasn't quite as connected as it is now.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that the flathead screw tension rod, because I went to the Musicians Hall of Fame here, and I was looking at like a bunch of stuff in there, you know, has been around for a long time, and one of their old, I forget whose kit it was, but it was an old Gretsch, and their tension rods had flathead slots, and I had never seen that. And I actually took a picture of it, so you mentioning that's kind of funny.
Whoa, and that was the first time you'd seen that?
Yeah.
Whoa, yeah, it's pretty wild.
I thought that is awful.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I know, it's true. Did you have a chance to get to the Johnny Cash Museum?
I haven't yet. I've walked into the lobby, but I haven't.
Cool.
I haven't gone through there yet.
It's pretty cool.
Awesome.
It's super fun. You should definitely check that place out.
Cool.
There's a lot of, you know, obviously it's like a bunch of old gear and,
yeah,
you know, the kind of the normal thing that I guess it's what you would expect, but it's super cool if you're a fan of Johnny Cash. So yeah, definitely go do that. Well, I guess we're fully into lugs now.
Yeah.
So, one thing that I did want to actually touch base on a little bit was, offset lugs got really popular a few years ago. How do you feel about offset lugs?
My kit has offset lugs.
I have a kit with offset lugs, and I have multiple snares. Well, I have at least a couple snares with offset lugs.
Okay.
But yeah, I do have one drum kit with offset lugs, and I feel like after just like a couple years, I was like, I could have just done without the offset lugs. I feel like it'd be, but I guess it's just like a aesthetic variation that I guess it's cool to have.
Yeah.
But it's like one of those features that feels like it's kind of a moment in time. It's like, it's not like classic or universal, you know.
Okay.
It kind of sets a specific drum in kind of an era.
I see.
You know, do you feel like that about it?
I didn't for a while, because my kit has a lot of offset lugs are usually just like a quarter offset. Like they're just they're really close by each other. My kit,
that's what I have.
Okay, my kit is 50% offset, so
so they just alternate up, down, up, down, up.
They're evenly spaced, and so
that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and I have a
that
snare.
Actually seems a little bit more like classic, like it'll age well.
I like it.
Yeah, it's kind of what I question about mine though, because it's like they're just a little bit off. You know, there's like not that much room in between like the lug for the top head and the bottom head. You know, so. I don't know. I guess I'm used to it or whatever, but it's definitely a thing that's occurred to me, because very often I lean towards trying to make things kind of classic. I don't know if it's because I'm risk averse or what it is, but I just feel like I don't want to commit to something that's a little bit weird.
Right.
And I don't know. I guess that's for the Do We Like or Not Like Personal Traits podcast. So we'll get into that one some other day. But so I do have experience with that, but I don't know that it serves any purpose other than aesthetics, I guess is what I'm actually trying to get at.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I thought that offset.
Ooh, this sounds interesting. Okay.
I thought that offset was a relatively new thing, and I thought it started in the Orange County era, because I play Orange County kit. My kick drum isn't Orange County. I had it made to match, but point being, I thought that was in that realm, when like the Orange County, Truth, SJC kind of area, because they do kind of set apart from DW and Pearl and
like all the
stuff.
More boutique kind of craft drum makers.
Yeah, they're a little more. Yeah, they all kind of fit in that realm. Well, I thought when I first saw offset, I thought it was like a newer thing, but for one, I'll use Orange County as an example. Their lugs are some of my favorite lugs because they're the shark tooth teardrop. But I didn't realize, I actually messaged Daniel Jensen. He and I were on a forum, I think, and he had mentioned that he pulled that idea from Sonar's original lug style, because Sonar uses a very, very similar lug, and it's very old. But the offset's actually been around for a long time, and I think the purpose originally started was the shallower drums. They didn't change their lug design, but but the lugs are, they're like 2 inches long, 1.5 inches long.
Yeah.
So the shallower it got, they couldn't have them end to end, top to bottom. So they had to shift.
Like they didn't fit. They didn't actually fit on the drum.
Right. So that they would shift them over so that they could make a shallower drum rather than having like, one on top of the other.
And that's really interesting too. Yeah, and that's really interesting too, because that's a choice. It's either a choice or maybe there's some necessity there. It depends on what your supply chain looks like, I guess. But it's definitely like a function of, so you said fitting them on the drum, but that means that you are sticking to using single-ended lugs. The tension rod only fits into the one side. And on some of like the very classic drums, there's double-ended lugs. So the tension rods from the top and the bottom head fit into the same lug, actually.
Exactly.
So that obviously would save or fix the situation of not being able to fit all the lugs on the drum.
Yeah, and what's cool is it went from being an intentional, like, this is how we solve the problem purpose, to now it is an aesthetic thing where you can just choose that. And because my drums don't need offset at all, but I just liked the idea, and I had never seen that design before.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really crazy. I the first drum I ever got with offset lugs was in fact an Orange County Drum and Percussion snare drum.
Nice.
And it had offset lugs, and I'm trying to remember now. I actually haven't pulled it out of the case in a little while. I'm trying to remember if the lugs do overlap, like if they would fit on the same drum. And I think they actually would fit on the same. I think they would fit because it's a 14x7, and I think there's enough room for that. But I don't know. And actually, it's interesting. When I had my last Battlefield kit built, it was one of the things that I really wanted to make sure was on it was double-ended lugs. I only wanted one set of lugs, and I wanted them directly in the middle of the drums on all of them, even the kick drum. It's like all of them, Yeah. There's just all the floor toms, everything's double-ended lugs on it, because I wanted that like super old looking classic kind of thing going on. And my kick drum's it's a 24x14, so it's like really big but shallow.
Yeah.
And all my drums on that kit are shallow.
Right.
Or all the length of them are all shallow. So it works with those. You don't have like a crazy long insane tension rod.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just really interesting. I feel maybe it was practical, like you said at one point. It was like fixing a problem, but then it became aesthetic, and it's actually interesting to think of it. Its roots, like the reason that it became a thing in that context. It kind of makes me feel a little bit better about it. But I still think when you're talking about, it's like tube lugs. It's like tube lugs and offset. It was like boom. It was like a moment in time, I feel like.
It's so funny you're saying that. That was what I was going to get at, because I love tube lugs. And
I've got a lot of tube lugs.
Yeah. I just heard the other day, or I read somewhere, that tube lugs they're considered an old school thing. And I'm like, really? Are you serious? Like, I love tube lugs. And
I mean, I consider them like an early 2000s thing, or like a 2000s thing,
and maybe that's why I like them, because that's a lot of the music I listened to is then, and when I started really developing in drums. But I still love tube lugs. In fact, if I were to have a custom kit and it weren't a DW or something, it would have tube. It would have tube lugs on it for sure.
That's cool. Yeah, I've got a ton of tube lugs. One of my Battlefield kits is all tube lugs, and then a lot of my snares are all tube lugs, because I got so many snares like in the 2000s.
Are they single-ended tube lugs, or are they double-ended tube lugs?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, both. I mean, on a lot of the snares are double-ended. Well, some of them are single-ended too. It depends on the drum.
Okay.
But then on my drum kit that has tube lugs, those are all single-ended.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and those are the ones that are offset.
Okay, I love the single-ended ones.
The whole kit. Yeah.
Is it
But then on the last kit that I had built by Battlefield, those are like more traditional lug. It's not a tube lug. It's I don't know what they're called. Imperial, or I don't know what they're called.
Is it the blue kit you're talking about?
Yeah, that one does not have tube lugs.
I think they're like I think they call it like a beaver tail or something.
That could
like
be
a beaver tail lug. I don't know. There's so many.
I guess
now.
I should have looked up what like lugs are named before we recorded this. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't feel like there's that. I could be wrong. I don't feel like there's that many different names of lugs as there are different like looks to them, but they all kind of fit under the same idea. Like there's teardrop, there's tube, there's round, and then you can get into like materials and stuff. But again, I think overall lugs are more of an aesthetic thing versus a functional. Well, that's not true. I don't know. I think there's a lot more functionality to them than there is. Oh my gosh, there's a lot more aesthetic to them than there is like I got them for this purpose, you know?
Right.
So
right.
Yeah, lugs, and of course you get into the lugs I was mentioning earlier, where people try to be innovative with their lug design and be like, this can help change your heads faster, and then they find out that it was a poor design. Whoever came up with that, if you're listening, I'm really sorry, but
yeah, I mean, in general,
anyway.
I feel like a lug is a lug, and it's all about the look of it. You know, for the most part, I don't know that it has any function other than holding the rim against the head.
Mm-hmm.
And it either holds it there or it doesn't. So I don't know. It's just the shape of it.
Well, since we're talking about it, we're gonna take a break here in a second. But real quick, have you seen that D? I think it's a D drum kit, and their lugs. They have red lugs. It's a black kit with red lugs on it, and the tension rods like swivel out. Have you seen that?
No.
It's been around for a while. I have no idea what it does, but it's a really intentional looking lug. And this is a poor way to even open up this conversation, but I have no idea what their purpose was in it. Yeah, it's like I'm gonna look it up. There's this D drum kit, and their lugs look like they have some kind of purpose to them. Like there's a slot at the top instead of like a normal insert. And it looks like the tension rods like swivel out or something.
Okay.
I have no idea, but
I don't know what that is. But okay.
Well, if anybody's listening and you can tell, you know what I'm talking about based off of my poor description, please reach out. I'm trying to find pictures of it and I can't. But anyway, I point being, I don't think that for a while there wasn't a whole lot of innovation when it came to lugs other than the aesthetic of it. But now I feel like people are trying to get past that boundary and make a purposeful lug. Like this not only looks cool, but it's doing something. And there's a lot of different products I think coming out. Whether or not they're good, I don't know.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that makes sense, and I guess it goes along with what we were saying earlier about like trying to innovate, and sometimes the innovation falls flat, and sometimes it actually kind of works. So it's always just, throw it out there and see if people like it and if it latches on or not. So, well, with that, let's take a quick little break, and we'll be right back.
Hey everybody, this is Travis, and I'm bringing you the tip of the day. So today's tip is very simple, and it is to always tune your drums to the environment that you're playing in. And what this means is, if you keep your drums at your house, and you tune your drums at your house, and then you move your drums to a different place, like a show or you're playing outside or something, you need to retune your drums to wherever you're at. What this does is, when your drums are tuned to a bedroom, the rooms are close and the reflections are very quick because the walls are very close to your kit. When you take your drums outside or a bigger room, there's a lot more space, a lot more room for the air to travel, a lot more room for the sound waves to travel, and so the reflections are going to be way different than your bedroom. On top of that, temperature can change, humidity can change, and this affects the heads on your drums, and it'll change the sound. So always retune your drums to the environment that you're playing in. It's super important, especially when you're recording. Now let's get back to the show. Hey everybody, you're listening to the DrumChats podcast, and we've been talking about lugs and lug design, which I feel like we could talk a lot about, and at the same time it's like having to do a lot of research because while there seems to be a limited amount of stuff to talk about with lugs, there are new designs or new functions coming out with lugs that I don't even think we know about yet. But all that being said, lugs, there's a lot of different options, and I didn't realize that some were being considered classic design, like tube lugs or offset lugs and beaver tails. And
tube lug is not classic.
I don't think so.
No one's going to convince me that a tube lug is classic. I mean,
Right?
I don't know. Maybe there's some kit out there.
Not cool anymore.
I mean, maybe there's some kit out there from like the 80s with tube lugs. I don't think that's true. I think they're all from the early 2000s. Am I wrong? I don't think that early 2000s are classic unless you're like 14.
Yeah, I think you're right because like in the 80s, I think the 80s had a lot more double-sided. Well, or I say that like the single-sided lugs. Like if you look at like at old Ludwigs, where the toms were super deep and they would have, it looked like it was one long lug, but that middle bridge part was just like kind of a filler. Like a Tama Star Classic, I think, has those.
Dude, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Those are crazy. They're like super long. It's like so much hardware.
Well, then at some point, I think we should mention, I don't think it really fits into lugs, but even the drums where they're just single-sided. Like they almost look like timbales, but it's like an actual drum kit where they don't have a resonant head or resonant lugs.
Oh
at
yeah,
all.
for sure. Yeah. I mean, there are definitely kits built like that, and they're starting to kind of like you see new ones around now actually that are a little bit like that, but it's really just like a throwback to the 60s and 70s, you know, because those were really popular. No bottom heads were really popular for a while, and honestly, like a lot of the function of it was because they'll throw their sound, like they're really directional. And so like, especially at the time too, like your drums would be tilted a little bit more. And so it'd be throwing sound out away from the drum kit. It would actually make your toms louder. But it's a really specific sound that I don't like.
I don't
it's
like it
like
either.
very specific,
Yeah.
It's cool if you're doing like a record that's like a little bit of a throwback thing or like classic, kind of like harkening back to something, can be super cool. And I don't know if, do you know the band Greta Van Fleet?
Yes. Yeah.
They, I don't know if they did this, but I feel like it's the thing that they would kind of do because the drum sounds on their record, I feel like they're really risky. Like they really, really made a choice that they're going to make their drums sound like they're from like 1975,
Oh, cool.
They're crazy. I feel like it was a huge risk. Again, we're going back to my risk aversion. But it's just really, really crazy that the choice that they made on those, and it seems like they would be the kind of band that would go ahead and use a drum kit that had no bottom heads on it. If anyone knows that, you should definitely let us know if that's true. But yeah, we've
definitely.
talked about lugs enough. And actually, I mentioned my Orange County Drum Percussion snare that has the offset lugs. That drum also has monster vents on it. It's like 3-inch vents or something, maybe bigger, 3.5. They're huge.
Yeah. Maybe
they're even bigger than that. They're like maybe 4-inch vents. I don't know. Whatever the big ones are, 3 or 4 inches. They're really big. But that drum has 4 of them.
I'm a fan of Orange County, and if you pull that out of the case anytime soon, please send me a picture of that, man. I want to see it.
I will. I'll do that.
I like vents, and what's interesting too is I think Orange County, they started doing a lot of like the 3-inch vents, like where they're just oversized.
Yeah.
A couple of my snares are vented. One of them I vented myself. 2 of them I did.
What?
I'm actually looking at one of them. Yeah, I have we were going to talk about classic snares, and I don't know if it's classic, but the PDP Blackout popcorn snare.
Oh yeah.
Of course, I think PDP made an entire Blackout snare drum series, but I just drilled, I think they're 3/8-inch holes behind each tension rod just to see what it would do, and
Okay.
definitely made it louder. But like,
Did it really?
What's up?
You noticed a difference with 3/8-inch vents?
A little bit. I think that
Is it behind every lug?
it's behind every tension rod. Yeah. So there's
Top
there's
and
2.
bottom?
Yeah, because it shares,
Whoa.
that PDP shares, it's a double-ended lug just in the middle. And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of space between the hoop and the lug. And so I just put it behind each rod. And I got that idea because my main snare that I use is my Risen Drums acrylic snare. And that has, I think they're 1/8-inch vents behind each tension rod. And it's super loud. Yeah. Well, and I think vents came out, I think you said it. Vents kind of became popular the same time that tube lugs became popular in that same area.
Yeah.
Because
it was like a tremendous year in drum innovation stylistically. It was just like venting everything, tube lugs, everything. Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. I've got that drum that has those huge vents in it, but then I also have another drum that I had built, a Battlefield drum. It's one of my favorite drums. It's a 14x7 maple. And I mentioned it once before. It has one ply above and below, like this kind of like center line that's peeled away, and it's wrapped on the top and bottom. And then there's a wood stripe that goes around the whole drum. That's actually, it's all the way through.
Cool.
It's part of the shell. But that one, I had him put vents in between every tension rod. They're just like right in the middle of the drum.
Okay.
And those are just like standard, like 1/2-inch vents. It actually has like the vent, like the metal vent ring. Like that would be on a drum. It has those in between every set of tension rods all the way around the drum.
Okay.
But they're small, they're like 1/2-inch or 3/8 or whatever, kind of like a normal small size would be that you would find on any drum. Cause any drum is really going to have at least one, usually 2 vents, right?
One.
Is that right? One? Is it one?
It's usually, one to 2. And that's just to allow the air to escape whenever you're hitting, cause if you hit the head, you're going to feel air come out of that. And that's for...
Yeah, quite a bit too. Like, and that's like, it's something that very early on, I think started being incorporated in drum design, like many years ago. And so if you grab any drum that you have, it's going to have a vent in it. Sometimes it's in like the middle of like the name badge, or it'll just be a separate spot where there's just a little hole in the side of the drum. Again, it's kind of the size of like a pencil. Usually. And that's just so when you actually strike the head and the air compresses inside the drum, it actually has someplace for the air to go. Otherwise, the top and bottom heads would be like always forcing each other to move in the same way, but it's because of the pocket of air that's actually trapped inside. So this way they can actually operate independently. Yeah. And of course the air is transferring the energy from one head to the other. But they're not locked by that pocket of air. They can actually vibrate independently of each other. So it was just like I don't know who started having that idea, but people started putting more and more vents in, and then eventually they got just like huge, where you could put a baseball through one of them.
Right.
They're pretty wild.
Yeah. I'm looking at some pictures of some of the pork pie ones, and they have the same rings that you're talking about around the vents. The little squealer, their little squealer series. I've never gotten huge into pork pie, but they have. It was the first time I'd ever seen that many of those 1/2-inch vents all the way around it, all over it. Look like Swiss cheese almost. But one thing I didn't really experiment with until recently, whenever I drilled one of my snare drums out, was I always thought that vents were just going to make it louder. But what some people may not know is that the larger and the more vents that you have, it's actually going to dry your snare out as well.
And it definitely does that a little bit, but I actually, my impression is that that's blown out of proportion a little bit online. Like if you look it up, people are constantly talking about that, but I feel like that's definitely blown out of proportion. But I haven't really played that. My super vented, that Orange County one, I haven't played that. It's like my main snare for a lot of years. So it does make me want to pull it out and mess around with it a little bit more. But I don't, it definitely does, but I don't think to the extent that someone might think.
Yeah. And maybe too, it may depend on how much you're cutting out of the shell. Like if you're drilling holes or cutting holes in it, it may just make it louder. But have you seen snare drums where it's actually like the shell isn't complete? Like it may have a double-ended tube lug all the way around it.
I know what you're talking about.
Top and the bottom.
Right. I know what you're talking about, but really only because it's referenced occasionally online. I don't even remember ever seeing one before. What do they call them? Like frame drums or something? Something
like that. And the first time I had seen that ever was in a magazine, and I want to say it was DW, but I could be wrong. But they came out with this design where you could almost like within the ply, it had like these acrylic sheets where you could open up the vents and close them with like this little switch.
Whoa.
And they weren't circles, they were slots, like long rectangular slots.
I think that was DW. I remember that drum. Yeah.
Yeah. It had this, just like this, I don't know how many there were because I never seen one in person. I just saw a picture of it. And I don't think that they've kept doing that. Maybe it didn't do as well as they thought they would or something, but I think
no one cared.
Yeah. I would like to have a snare drum that was held together by just lugs.
Really? I mean, I think it's kind of just like your large vents, right? How big are the vents on your, what did you say it was a Risen, that acrylic one? How big are the vents on that?
They're like an 1/8 inch, so they're pretty small.
Oh, that's right. You said they were small. So you don't have any with like the 3-inch vents.
Yeah.
Or anything. Okay, yeah. Well, maybe that's something you should dive into before getting like a weird frame, little whatever mutant drum. You know, because the thing is, like, I think they're going to serve the same purpose, but the large vents, it's like a style thing. It's really interesting, but it still retains qualities of a normal drum, you know? So like when the vents get that big, you start hearing more of the heads. Like the shell is producing less and less of the tone. Right. Because the air is escaping so quickly, and the vibrations are kind of getting dissipated quicker. So the shell actually has a little bit less to do with the sound of the drum, and it really is a lot more with the heads. Yeah. And again, these are like in varying degrees. But the thing that's so interesting to me about having those large vents is how much the bottom head actually plays into the tone. It's way more than a normal snare drum. Yeah. It's you definitely hear the bottom head more, and you have to pay a little bit more attention to the tuning of the bottom head and not just cranking it or whatever. Well, so that's definitely an interesting thing about those huge vents.
And I feel like too, I feel like the depth would definitely matter, because like the less shell that you have, like the larger vents you have.
Oh,
like
that's true. Yeah.
Even those frame vents, like I feel like the deeper your shell gets, the further away the resonant head would get. And at some point that the air is really going to escape more before it gets to the bottom.
Yeah, that's absolutely true too, because of course with the snares being on the bottom head, the only thing giving it the snare drum sound are those snares vibrating against the bottom head. So if you're not transferring all the energy, you're definitely losing that. So that's the thing about vented snares too, is you start to lose sensitivity in the drum pretty quickly. So if you're a masher and you're just like beating the heck out of your drums, it's probably going to work just fine. But if you're playing anything subtle, having large vents is not what you want at all.
Yeah, I feel like if you're going to vent it and you just want noise, it seems like the smaller vents, you can have more smaller vents and still produce a louder sound versus having a couple huge vents, and it's going to drastically change, like you said, the sensitivity, the air escape. If you have smaller vents, it's going to escape, but the shell is going to vibrate a lot more because it has a lot more body to it.
Yeah. And you noticed even with the small vents that your drum got louder?
A little bit. Not
interesting,
like, not significantly.
Right.
I noticed, in fact, on this one, and I don't know if it's because they're closer to the bearing edge as opposed to being in the middle of the shell, but it actually produced some more, not really ringing, but I guess like just like a higher frequency overtone. And I don't know.
Yeah, that's actually interesting, because I feel like my experience with the large vents, I'm not really talking about the small vents very much because it's such a subtle thing with the small vents. But my experience with that Orange County drum that I have with the 3-inch vents is pretty dramatic, you know? And again, like you hear that bottom head a lot, you hear the snares a lot. It's definitely very loud. It's very cutting. And there is kind of like this high end, like high mids kind of thing that like really cuts with it. And again, I think it's just because you're hearing that bottom head that's cranked, and hearing those snares a lot more. So yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, but it's like, it's one of those things that seems, again, like it was a little bit of a moment in time, and it's less popular now, the large vents, but they're still around, of course.
Yeah. And then I've noticed too, some companies, it's never gotten super big, but I noticed companies like SJC and Orange County and those guys, you can they'll even get into venting, but it's more of like a design where that's really more of just a cool, hey, like, just an aesthetic thing where it's still venting it, but it's more of a just putting a picture in the side of your snare drum and cutting it out kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, point being, I think, I think we really tackled it well, was the smaller vents are going to be more of a subtle change. They're going to allow the air to escape, but you're still going to get more sensitivity from the shell. And the larger they get, to an extent, it will dry it out, but it'll change the sensitivity between the bottom head and the top head because of there's more air escaping at one time.
Right.
And with that being said, let's go ahead and take another break, and then we'll come back and we're going to talk about some classic snare drums to wrap up this series with. Hey everybody, this is Travis, and I'm bringing you today's story time. So today's story has two parts to it. And the first part is a couple years ago, I had the opportunity to go see Blink-182 in Austin, Texas. And at the time, I had never gotten to see them. And I'd always wanted to see Travis Barker play live and always wanted to meet him. And my friend Glenn called me and said, hey, I've got 2 tickets. Let's go. So we showed up early, waited in line, and we rushed the stage as soon as the gates opened. And we were there. We got about 15 feet off the stage. And All Time Low was opening, which is another one of my favorite bands, and we got to listen to them and see them up close. And it was really fun. And then Blink-182 comes out, and they start playing the show, and my eyes are fixated on Travis and watching him play. And I'd always seen videos of him playing or tutorials playing, but I never got to see him live. And so seeing him play live was a different experience, and I was trying to take in as much as I could and just enjoy the whole event. And then they play the song Stay Together for the Kids, and at the very end of the song, Travis stands up and throws his stick out to the crowd. And when you know it, I caught it, and I fought for it, and then as soon as I grabbed it, I lifted my shirt and stuck it down the waist of my pants so that nobody could grab it from me. Story number 1. So I still have that drumstick today. Story number 2, flash forward a couple months later, I flew out to California to go see them again, which sounds like a fanboy thing to do, but Glenn called me and he said, hey, I got 2 VIP tickets. We'll get in, see the sound check, and we'll meet the band, and go see him again. And that was really neat because we showed up super early, met the band, took a picture with them, listened to sound check, and then the show started, and All American Rejects were one of the 3 openers that played. Glenn and I were dead center, right up on the rail, 5 feet away from the stage. And a lot of the All American Rejects songs we didn't know because they were some of their new songs. We knew a bunch of their old ones. And as we're not singing along, Tyson, the lead singer, looks down at us, and I feel like during the song he is just consistently making eye contact with me, and it's super uncomfortable. And I'm trying not to make eye contact with him, but it's kind of hard not to. And the end of the song comes, they finish, and as soon as the song is over, as he's looking down at our direction, he says, "What's wrong, tattoo guy? Not having a good time?" In front of like 20,000 people. And he's talking to my friend Glenn, who is standing right next to me, and the entire place burst out laughing, including myself. And if you don't believe me, there's actually a YouTube video of that happening. And if you want to see that video, you can follow me on Instagram at @thetravdav, and I will post it because it's the funniest thing that I've ever seen at a concert that I was at least. So that's today's story time. Hope you enjoyed it. Let's get back to the show. All right, guys, we are back on the DrumChats podcast. We're wrapping up our snare drum series. And before we go, we were going to mention a couple of famous, well-known snare drums that a lot of people seem to know and have in their arsenal, and some that are claimed to be some of the best snare drums ever listed. One of them being a Ludwig Acrolite, I know is pretty well known, and I've read that a lot of guys call it a secret weapon that a lot of session drummers should have.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's there's a lot of different snare drum materials that even become considered classic and famous, like bell brass snares. I've seen it doesn't really matter what snare you have, as long as like if it's a bell brass snare. That's a pretty famous one. Dave, what all have you found on your end?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to touch on that Acrolite real quick. It is kind of like the classic like secret weapon, because it was a student snare originally, and then over the years people discovered like, wow, this cheap student snare is really cool and it has an interesting sound. It's pretty tight and pretty dry and versatile, and it's like all over all kinds of songs that we've all heard. And I know you just recently got one, and I'm jealous of that. And I need to go check out some garage sales and see if I can find one really cheap. But yeah, the Acrolite by Ludwig is super famous. And then you mentioned the bell brass. I think that's the same type of brass that a Black Beauty is made out of, right? That's bell brass. I
think
right?
so. Yeah.
Is that right? Because Black Beauty, which again, one of the most famous drums made by Ludwig, is seamless beaded nickel plated brass.
Oh, okay.
So it's nickel plated brass. And you can get brass drums plated in different things, but the classic Black Beauty is nickel plated. And I actually have a Ludwig Black Beauty, and then I've got a Battlefield Black Beauty that's actually hammered.
Nice.
That one's hammered.
Yeah.
So and those are super, super cool. You should definitely look them up. They're pretty expensive and they're heavy, and they just sound really fantastic if you can get your hands on one. And they come in a couple different sizes. The classic size is 6.5 by 14.
Yeah.
But they also come in, I think, a 5-inch depth. Wait, do they come in a 5? And I think they may be coming in an 8 now, but I don't think that's like a weird thing, I think, right? That's kind of an odd one. But yeah, that's a drum that everyone it has some mystique to it, right? The Black Beauty. Another one by Ludwig, actually, that most people, whether they know it or not, they've heard it a ton of times, is the Supraphonic, which is their aluminum snare. It's similar to the Acrolite, because the Acrolite is aluminum, but the Supraphonic is also aluminum, and it's seamless beaded aluminum. I think it's a little bit thicker than the Acrolite. And it always has 10 lugs, and it's like a 5-inch or a 6.5-inch depth again. I actually don't really know what makes the Supralite or the Supraphonic way different than the Acrolite. Because if you just look at the numbers, what they are, they seem like they're really pretty similar.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're like the Acrolite's 1.6 millimeters. The thickness of the shell, and then the Supraphonic's 1.7, so that's really similar.
Okay.
And the classic Acrolite, though, the classic one is 8 lugs, and the Supraphonic's 10 lugs. So that makes a little difference in the tuning. And I actually am really a big fan of less lugs. This is something I actually wanted to touch on when we were talking about lugs a little bit. I'm a fan of having less lugs. On a snare, it's cool to have more. Have 10 is what you see a lot of times on snare drums. Because you can kind of fine tune a little bit more. And especially with snares, you can really change the tuning by changing 1 or 2 of the lugs, not having them all even around the drums. So it can really be helpful to have kind of the ability to fine tune it by having more lugs. But on toms especially, but sometimes on snare too, I really do like having less lugs. I think it's really cool because you can have the same tension on a drum, and it's spread across a fewer lugs. And so each lug has more tension on it, even though the head has the same, right? So you can actually tune your drum lower, and the lugs the tension rods will actually have more tension on them each individually, because maybe you only have, 8 instead of 10.
That makes sense.
So the same tension has to go across, divided by 8 as opposed to divided by 10. So actually, like a lot of my toms have 5 or 7 lugs on them. I had them like make with less lugs just so I could tune them down. Like my 13-inch rack tom has only 5 lugs on it, and it's so
5
cool.
lugs? That's
yeah,
cool.
dude. It's super cool. It's really, really cool. Yeah, so you can tune it lower, but each tension rod has more tension on it, so it's not like a lug.
Sense.
You know, the tension rod's not flopping around. You know.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing. But the Acrolite only has 8 lugs. I think they're available in 10 lugs, but that's not really an Acrolite.
That's not an Acrolite.
No, an Acrolite has 8 lugs.
I found something too, and I don't know how common it is, but Ludwig actually, we talked about Black Beauty and we talked about Superphonic, but Ludwig made a Superphonic Black Beauty.
I don't even, what is that? What does that mean?
I'm looking at it right now, and it looks like a nickel plated Superphonic, basically, because,
okay.
Yeah, I don't really know what the purpose would be. I'm looking at it saying a brass construction, nickel-plated finish, and a warm metallic tone you can hear for yourself. Blah,
Well, that
blah,
just
blah.
sounds like a Black Beauty.
It just sounds like a Black Beauty. Do Black Beauties have that little... You know how like the Superphonic they have, and I think the Acrolite has it too, where they have that kind of bead that goes around the middle?
Yeah. Yeah, the Black Beauty does as well.
It does as well? Okay.
Yeah,
Maybe the article I'm looking is just referring to a Black Beauty, but it's calling it a Superphonic Black Beauty.
Yeah,
So
that
I
might
don't
be
know
a
if they-
thing. I mean, a Superphonic is aluminum and a Black Beauty is brass. So I don't know what it means. I don't know what it means if you combine those two together. So I guess that's something that we can look up, or maybe someone can chime in and tell us what the heck that is, a Superphonic Black Beauty, because it seems like you're combining two famous things, which I guess makes an even more famous thing. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
What are some other drums that you think of when you think of like famous, well-known drums? The Sensitone is one. Pearl. I'm not a huge fan of Pearl, but yeah, that's another one that you kind of hear about. And if you look up like demos on YouTube or something, it kind of is almost like immediately recognizable. You're like, oh yeah, that drum. You know,
Well,
but that's
realize...
a steel drum.
Well,
that's a steel drum, and that's different than any of the Ludwigs we've talked about so far.
Yeah, and I have a Sensitone that a friend just gave to me. I guess he was getting rid of it. But I didn't realize this, but one of the drummers that we help over at Drum Paradise, in one of his trunks, he actually has a wood Sensitone snare drum. And I didn't know that they made them in wood. I thought it was all just
me neither.
Metal. Yeah. It kind of it kind of threw me off, but mine is an alloy steel Sensitone.
Okay, yeah.
But his was wood, and I haven't been able to see what kind of wood it was, whether it was maple or not. But in fact,
and the Sensitone, actually, side note, the Sensitone is like the John Bonham snare, right? Isn't that what he played?
Oh,
yes. Just go ahead and say yes.
Yes, it was.
Okay, perfect. I'm pretty sure the Sensitone, Pearl Sensitone is John Bonham's drum of choice. I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking it up. Pearl made it's a premium maple 5x14 Sensitone.
Right. And I think that is the classic. It's like 5-inch or 6.5-inch. And I think John Bonham played like the 5-inch, didn't he?
I'm going to say yes.
Say yes. Yeah, I love it. It's so good. It's funny. Another one actually that I quickly found is Phil Rudd, AC/DC. I always feel like that's such a distinctive snare drum sound, and it sounds huge and thuddy and like short and tight. And his classic drum is a 14x5 as well, and it's a chrome plated brass drum. So it's just another plating on that, a bell brass, I guess. I think that's what that is. And I think he played Sonar drums forever. So it's probably still the same thing. I don't know. But yeah, 14x5 brass drum. So it's interesting, like seeing some of like the big fat, like famous snare drum sounds, and they're only 5-inch depths, you know? It's pretty interesting. And the same thing with Chad Smith from like the Chili Peppers. He also plays like a 14x5, I think, or maybe a 14x6.5. I think he plays a Sensitone or something similar. I think he also has like a signature drum that Pearl makes or something, which is either it's like a version of the Sensitone, I believe.
I see. I know Chad moved over to he moved over to DW recently, and we
Oh,
and
okay.
he was with Pearl for a while. I am wondering on John Bonham, because John Bonham was a Ludwig guy. Did he play Pearl?
Oh, man. We're just gonna say yes again.
If any,
I don't know.
If
we,
anybody, if
we
anybody,
have might have bad information here.
we may have really bad information. Yeah, I've always known him as a Ludwig Vistalite player, and
Oh yeah.
I'd be interested to see, because everything I pull up with John Bonham is that he played a Superphonic, either a Superphonic or a Black Beauty. But if somebody out there knows that he played Pearl,
Oh, okay.
I would love to know.
No, I bet you're right. I bet you're right.
Yeah, I feel like classic snare drums, I feel like Ludwig just tends to take the cake, because for one, they've been around for so long.
Yeah.
You know, DW came out, in the 70s, I think?
I don't
70s
know
or
when they came out.
80s?
I don't know.
Pearl's been around for a while, but I feel like Ludwig they win on classic snare drums.
You've got some of these other companies though that are super classic though, like Gretsch. You know, there's
Oh yeah,
Gretsch kits are super cool. They're super classic, and there's some really old ones. I have one from the 70s, and then but there's really really cool old Gretsch kits around, and then another one that a little lesser well known but has like a mystique about it is Rogers.
Oh yeah,
Rogers drums. But like I don't, when I think of like a snare drum that's kind of like your all around classic famous snare drum, it really, I really feel like Ludwig has got a leg up on almost everyone.
yeah.
Between the Black Beauty, the Superphonic, and the Acrolite, it's just like boom, 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 just all these heavy hitters when it comes to snare drums, you know?
Yeah. And
yeah.
it makes me wonder what snare drum will be considered a classic 20, 30 years from now, especially like,
Probably a Black Beauty.
Yeah, nope, that's always
Still.
going to win. I think DW is still coming out with a bunch of different stuff. Like again, like we've talked before about their concrete snare drum, their super solid shell. I feel like a lot of people are making stave snares. That's become really popular in the garage, like the garage builders. But yeah, I feel like the Black Beauty, the Superphonic, and the Acrolite, all Ludwigs, just take the cake, which is funny because I've never owned a Black Beauty. I really want a Black Beauty, and a friend of mine used to have a Black Beauty, and he hated it. Whenever he told me that, I wanted to slap him, but he said it wasn't as versatile as you would think it was. Like, it sounded great when it was tuned a certain way, but he liked a really fat snare, and his was a 6.5 by 14, and it didn't get
that's what I have.
Okay, yeah, he didn't get what he wanted out of it, and I don't know if it was a user error or what, but
well, our relationship with drums gets personal, and our tuning style and the head choice that we use, and there's so many factors, and that's a lot of what we've been trying to talk about, and why we broke this into 3 parts, because there's so many variables, there's so many things you can do with your drum, and what you do with your drum could be like a world away from what the next guy does with his drum, or girl, of course.
yeah.
But it's just there's just so many moving pieces. So yeah, our relationship with drums, and especially snare drums, can be very personal and very personalized. It's certainly interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on our little journey through snare drums. There's an ungodly amount of information that we could still cover, and maybe we need to clarify some of it in the future, because we had a lack of certainty on a lot of things here as we were trying to wrap things up. But there'll be plenty more time to talk about that and nail some things down. But thanks so much for joining us for our little wrap up of the snare drum series.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, guys. And again, if you have questions or responses to anything that we've said, or if you can prove us wrong on some things, which is pretty likely, you can reach out to us on drumchats.com, email us. You've got our links on Instagram and Facebook. So hit us up. Let us know what you guys are playing and what y'all like. And we are done talking about snare drums, and we'll just have our next episode come out on October 15th. So stay tuned for that, and we will see you guys next time.
Cool. See you guys.